Hi, my name is Nancy Sifford Alana, and I am an author. I hope that you caught the first video, and if you did, you know that we are reading the book, The Lost Treasure of Lincoln County. Lincoln County is in North Carolina, and the setting for this story is Lincoln County in the city of Lincolnton in 1958. We have met the main characters, Jonas and Dale. They are 10-year-old boys who live across the street from each other. They're very different in many ways, and yet they're very good friends. They spend a lot of time together, and they like to have adventures together and go exploring and all. So they are quite ready to get things going for their summer. Summer has just started, and so they are ready for their adventures to begin. So we are ready to start Chapter 3 of The Lost Treasure of Lincoln County. This is one of my favorite chapters. It's called The Creek and the Small Wooden Box. The next day, Jonas and Dale decided to walk down the street to do some exploring in a park that had a small creek running through it. The creek seldom had enough water in it to fish or play in, but recent rains had helped to fill it up enough to play in. The creek was fed by a couple of natural springs, which helped to keep some water flowing all the time. Sometimes the boys would find interesting rocks or bugs or something entirely unexpected. Jonas and Dale were on the lookout for lizards. Jonas hoped to capture one and put it in the mason jar he had brought along with him. Jonas ran ahead of Dale, hoping to be the first to spot a lizard and begin the chase. Dale never really liked lizards or any other creepy crawly creatures, but he didn't want to tell Jonas. He thought lizards were creepy, and it scared him when they took off running. He was afraid they would run over to him and up his leg. They never did, but Dale could only imagine the horror of it. Dale ran to catch up with Jonas. The creek had more water in it than they had seen in a long time. Rather than look for lizards, the boys decided to build a boat out of some sticks and tall grass that had grown along the banks of the creek. They tried several different ways to make it work and finally found a way to keep two sticks together with string they found on the ground. Each of the boys made a boat. They placed them in the moving water to test them. "Hey, Dale," Jonas shouted. Jonas loved to tease Dale. He reached in his pocket and threw a rubber snake at Dale's feet. Dale screamed. "You scream like a girl," Jonas laughed. Dale didn't think it was funny. "I don't either," Dale yelled back. Dale knew that his scream did sound like a girl's scream, but he couldn't help it. He didn't like snakes or lizards. The boat sailed quickly down the creek, bumping off rocks as they went. "Hey, Dale," Jonas yelled, "look!" Dale didn't really want to look. He thought Jonas had seen a lizard or had another trick to play on him. On the side of the creek bank, Jonas had spied an old box. Dale saw it too. The boys snatched up their boats and splashed over to it. They stood over it for a few seconds, and each one tried to guess what was in it. "Maybe it's a pirate's treasure that was lost a long time ago," said Jonas. "Or maybe it was left by a bank robber like Jesse James and is full of money," Dale imagined. "Yee-haw! Wouldn't that be great?" exclaimed Jonas. "Let's open it." "Be careful. You never know what might be in it or under it," said Dale, hoping something creepy wouldn't crawl out from under it when Jonas picked it up. The box was definitely old and had been in that spot for a long time. It was halfway buried under the dirt and weeds. Dale was surprised Jonas had seen it at all. He took a step back as Jonas used his hands to dig it out of the dirt. Jonas pulled it out and showed Dale. They both stood and looked at it, turning it over and looking at the bottom of it. They sat down on a large rock with the box between them. It was so old that the lid was stuck to it. They weren't quite sure how they would open it. Jonas found a stone on the ground that had a sharp edge. He ran the stone around the rim of the lid and that seemed to help break away some dirt. Jonas placed his fingers on the lid and began pulling. Dale stood by watching every move that Jonas made. He hoped to be the first to catch a glimpse of what was inside. Jonas pulled again and again, then with one final pull, the lid flew off. Jonas and Dale stood with the box between them and looked in amazement at its contents. Inside the box, covered with an old velvet cloth, were a piece of paper that had yellowed with age, like this, and an old photograph of a man and a woman and several small children. The boy sat back on the rock. Dale reached for the photograph. The photograph was faded. Had something written on the back. It was Sifford. Sifford was written on the back and was dated 1840. He did not know of anyone named Sifford and was not even sure it was a family name, but it could have been. He put the photo back in the box. Dale held on to the box while Jonas picked up the piece of paper that had been folded in half. Very slowly, Jonas unfolded the paper. What is this? Asked Jonas. Looks like some sort of drawing. What do you think, Dale? Hold it over here in the sunlight. It has faded so badly it's hard to see what's on it, said Dale as he squinted to look. I think we need to take it away from the creek and find a sunny area so we can see it better. The boys carefully placed the paper and the velvet cloth back into the box with the photo and put the lid back on it. They retraced their steps and walked far enough away from the creek that the darkness from the trees ended and the sunlight began. Jonas and Dale sat down in a grassy area and opened the box again. Looks like a map, Dale. Do you see those marks? A couple of squiggly lines and 3 circles, and there is an X right here, said Jonas as he pointed to the paper. What do you think it means? Dale asked. He hoped Jonas would have a good answer for him, but he didn't. Jonas looked as confused as Dale. So what do we do now? Well, let's stop for a minute and let's look at this. This was from John Sifford. It had John's name on it, and it had a bunch of squiggly lines, and you see how faded it was on this old piece of paper? Gosh, there's even some holes in that piece of paper. And then they found this photo that had a man and a woman and some children. And you remember what was written on the back? It says Sifford, 1840. I wonder if we're going to find any answers out in the next chapter. I think we better keep on reading, don't you? Chapter 4, Searching for Clues. The boys decided not to tell anyone about the box. They wanted to see if they could find some information out about local history at the public library. Hopefully they would find out something that would lead them to the meaning of the items in the box. The boys found a place under a large bush to hide the box while they were in the library. The Lincoln County Library was located in a building about a block from the courthouse. Jonas and Dale walked into the library and stood for a moment and looked around the big room full of books, newspapers, and heavy wooden furniture. Several people were wandering up and down the aisles looking at books on the shelves. A group of children were sitting on the floor reading some books in the children's section. The boys spied the librarian, Miss Belle. Miss Belle was young and pretty. She was tall and thin and was always smiling. Jonas thought her name was kind of funny for a librarian. Bells were loud and everyone knew you had to be quiet in the library. "Hello, Miss Belle," said Jonas. "Hello, Jonas. What can I do for you and Dale?" she asked. Jonas and Dale were always coming in to look at books, especially on really hot days. The library had tall ceilings and was cooled with ceiling fans that were hung from long poles from the ceiling. Books and magazines needed to be kept in cool places, and the library was built just for that. Miss Belle, do you have any books on the history of Lincolnton? Asked Jonas. We have one whole section over there on local history. Can you tell me what you're looking for so I can help you find it? She asked as she pointed the boys in the direction of the books. Oh, no, ma'am. We have lots of questions, and so we thought we could look through several books on our own and not bother you. Would that be okay? Jonas replied, hoping not to look suspicious. That would be fine. You are all on your own. I will be over at the checkout counter if you need anything or if you have any questions. With that, Miss Belle left the boys to look at the books on their own. Both boys were good readers and enjoyed reading. That was a good thing because they might have to read through hundreds of books before they found what they were looking for. They decided that each of them would select 10 books. They chose a large table with 6 chairs. Jonas sat at one end and Dale sat at the other end across the table. That way they would have plenty of room. To be more efficient, they decided to look at the table of contents and the index first. The name Sifford was a clue, and the date 1840 was a clue. That was all they had to go on as they looked through the books. They searched through book after book and found nothing. Their table was stacked high with books. Miss Belle would be busy putting all those books back on the shelf. They decided they would do something nice for her when they finished their research. It didn't seem long until it was 5 o'clock and time for the library to close. Miss Belle came over to the table and told them that they would have to leave and come back in the morning. They could tell she noticed all the books on the table, but she just smiled and didn't say anything. She rather enjoyed watching the boys look at all the books. The boys left the library and walked toward the bush where they had hidden the box. They made sure no one was watching them when they pulled it out. They needed to find a safe place to keep the box until they were ready to tell their secret. What should we do with the box? Asked Jonas. I don't know, said Dale. He didn't have any ideas. I wish we had a safe place to put it close to the library so we didn't have to look so suspicious. If we check the box every day and then go to the library, someone may wonder what we're doing. I've got it. Mr. Whit's old house is right over there. It has been abandoned for years. There's an old doghouse next to the garage. We can put the box in the doghouse. We practically walk by there going home anyway. Jonas was glad he had thought of the old doghouse. Dale agreed it would be a great place. The boys started toward Mr. Whit's old house when a summer rainstorm began. They ran toward the old house, put the box in the doghouse, and took off running for home. See you in the morning at 9, Jonas, yelled Dale as he ran down the sidewalk toward home. See you later, alligator, yelled Jonas. After a while, crocodile, yelled Dale back to Jonas. Jonas had a hard time sleeping that night. He kept thinking about the old box and its contents. He thought about the map and the photograph and wondered who the people were in the picture. And how did that box get to the creek bed? Had it been placed there on purpose? Did someone hide it there? These were just some of the questions running through Jonas's mind as he slipped off to sleep. Chapter 5, Clues Uncovered. Bye, Mom. I'm meeting Dale at the library, Jonas shouted as he started out the door the next morning. His mom did not seem suspicious. She knew that Jonas and Dale enjoyed playing the day away, although she was a little surprised that they were going to the library so early in the day. Hey, Dale, you ready to solve a mystery? Asked Jonas as he met up with Dale in front of the house. Not so loud, Jonas. You don't want anyone to know what we're doing. You're right, said Jonas. He ran a couple of steps ahead and said, Come on, I'll race you. The boys took off running toward the library. On the way, they ran by Mr. Whit's old house and peeked inside the doghouse. The box was still there. When they got to the library, the boys each took 10 more books and sat down at their table. Miss Belle smiled at them. She was beginning to get curious about what they were looking for, but decided not to ask them anything just yet. Jonas picked up a book about Lincoln County and read some about the history of the county. The town of Lincolnton had settlers as early as 1779. Lincoln County was named after General Benjamin Lincoln, an officer in the American Revolution. That was interesting. He had always thought it had been named for Abraham Lincoln. Now he knew for sure that Lincolnton was named after General Benjamin Lincoln. While Jonas was reading about General Lincoln, Dale found a book that had lots of old photographs. There were photographs of Lincolnton dated in the 1800s. The pictures showed the Lincoln County Courthouse and stores across the street from the courthouse. There were horses and horse-drawn wagons parked along the dirt streets. It looked dusty and old. He flipped through the pictures and saw some familiar places. Dale saw pictures of some of the early pioneers in Lincoln County. He looked carefully at each of the pictures and the names of the people in the pictures. Even old Mr. Whit's picture was in the book. It said that Mr. Whit had owned a farm at the edge of town before he moved into Lincolnton. When he moved into town, Mr. Whit owned a general store on East Main Street. Dale was just about to close the book and move to the next one when he spotted the picture of the family he had seen in the old box. "Jonas, look!" Dale gasped. Jonas jumped up from the table and walked around to look at the book Dale was holding. "Look, Jonas, here's the picture we saw in the box." Dale wanted to say it louder, but he remembered to keep his voice down. He looked across the library and saw Miss Belle was looking at him. He just smiled and waved at her. "Good job, Dale. Okay, let's read what it says over here beside the picture." Jonas and Dale found the inscription and read it together out loud. "Early German settlers, John Sifford, wife Catherine Elizabeth Durr Sifford, Lincoln County, North Carolina, 1840. "That's them," said Jonas with muffled excitement. "That's them." "Now what?" asked Dale. "Now we need to find out how that box got there and what that map means," Jonas said. "Keep looking." Both boys went back to looking at the books, and now they knew for sure who was in the picture and where they had lived. The boys buried their heads in the books and kept on looking for something, anything that would give them an idea of what the map was trying to tell them. At 5 o'clock, Miss Belle came by the table and told the boys it was time to go home. Jonas asked if he could check out the book Dale had found in the picture. Miss Belle walked with the boys to the checkout counter. "Miss Belle, how long have you lived in Lincolnton?" asked Jonas. "Well, Jonas, I've lived here all my life. I was born in that clinic at the edge of town. Dr. Crowell was my doctor. Why do you ask?" "Miss Belle, do you know anyone in town that has lived here a really long time?" Let me think a minute. There are several people who have lived here since they were born, but I suppose the wisest and most knowledgeable about our local history would be Harry Sifford. "Who?" asked Jonas and Dale at the same time. They looked at each other in amazement. "Harry Sifford. He lives over on Poplar Street beside that tall pecan tree. What are you two boys looking for in all those books?" Miss Belle seemed to be getting suspicious. "We're just looking for some information about Lincolnton, but maybe Mr. Sifford could help us faster," said Jonas as he grabbed the book he was checking out. He and Dale walked outside as quickly as they could. "Can you believe that?" Dale burst out as soon as they were outside. "Can you believe what she said? She said Sifford, and that's the name on the picture." "No, I can't believe it. Come on, Dale, let's go find that big pecan tree on Poplar Street." Although it was late in the afternoon, the boys took off to find the pecan tree. It was a huge tree that everyone in town knew about. It would not be hard to find. The boys found the tree and the mailbox that had Sifford written on the side of it. It was too late to stop by Mr. Sifford's house, but tomorrow was a new day. They could hardly wait for 9 a.m. to come so they could go see Mr. Sifford. Chapter 6, The Wisest and Most Knowledgeable. Bright and early the next morning, Jonas sprang out of bed. He could hardly wait to meet Mr. Sifford and see if he knew anything about the picture and the map. As soon as his father left for work, Jonas said goodbye to his mother and set out to find Dale. Dale was sitting on the street curb waiting for him. He was just as excited about meeting Mr. Sifford as Jonas. The boys stopped by Mr. Whit's old house first. The house was old and had been neglected since Mr. Whit died. There were large trees around the house that provided so much shade that very little sunlight ever made it through to the ground. The grass was patchy and weeds grew tall around the fence line. The old doghouse the boys were using to hide their box in was built for a small dog. It had been painted white, but most of the paint had chipped off. Only spiders, ants, and other creatures had lived in it for years. After Dale looked closely around the door of the doghouse to make sure no spiders were hanging around, he reached in and pulled out the box. They decided to take it to Mr. Sifford's house. If they found him, they could trust him, they might, just might, show it to him. If the map led to a buried treasure, they wanted to find it themselves. So they had to be careful. Jonas checked his Timex watch he had received as a Christmas gift. The Timex ad said, "It takes a licking and keeps on ticking." Jonas was always breaking his watches, and his parents thought this was the best watch for him. It was 9 a.m. and time to go see Mr. Harry Sifford. The boys headed down the street. They walked down Poplar Street and kept their eyes on the tall pecan tree. Once they were there, they double-checked the mailbox to make sure they were at the right house. Jonas and Dale walked slowly up to the front door with the old box in Jonas's hands. Dale rang the doorbell. The boys were nervous. They hoped Mr. Sifford was a nice man and that he didn't mind early visitors. An older man opened the door. "Yes, can I help you boys?" he asked. Jonas began first. "Hi, sir, my name is Jonas, and this is my friend, Dale. We live a few blocks over on the other side of the library toward the park. I'm sorry to bother you, sir, but Miss Belle said you were the wisest and most knowledgeable man about local history in Lincolnton. We were hoping you could help us." Mr. Sifford laughed. "Well, I'm not sure I'm wise or knowledgeable, but I might be able to help you." He pushed open the screen door and asked the boys to come in. They looked at each other first, wondering if going into the man's house was a smart thing to do. As the screen door opened wider, they could see an older woman in the house. She looked like a nice grandma. They decided to take a chance. Mr. Sifford introduced himself and stuck out his hand to shake hands with the boys. "Jonas and Dale, this is my beautiful bride of 48 years. Virginia, come over here and meet these young men." They said they heard I was wise and knowledgeable. Mr. Sifford chuckled again. Virginia Sifford was very kind. She smiled at the boys and offered them some milk and homemade cookies. The boys agreed they could use a snack and happily accepted the offer. While Mrs. Sifford prepared the snack, Mr. Sifford walked toward the dining table. It didn't look as if the table had been used to eat off of in quite a while. Every inch of it was covered with stacks of papers and books. The boys learned that Mr. Sifford was writing a book about his family history, and the papers and books contained information he needed for his book. "Boys, let's go sit down on the back porch and talk. I'll see if I can help you out." Mr. Sifford began walking toward the back door. It was a sliding glass door. The boys let Mr. Sifford slide the door open, and they stepped out into a big backyard. Jonas was still holding on to the box. "Mr. Sifford, do you know of a buried treasure around here?" Jonas burst out as soon as he was seated on the back porch. Dale looked at Jonas as if he had lost his mind. That was not a good way to start a conversation with a stranger. He thought they were going to ease into the conversation before mentioning the box. "Well, no, I can't say I know of any buried treasure in Lincolnton. What makes you think there's a buried treasure around here?" Mr. Sifford got up to open the sliding door for Mrs. Sifford, who had the cookies and milk on a tray. "Virginia, do you know of a buried treasure around Lincolnton?" "My goodness, no," said Virginia. "If I had heard of a buried treasure, I'd be up there right now with my shovel looking for it." She laughed as she talked and set the tray down on a small table on the porch. The boys jumped up to help her as she handed them their glass of cold milk and chocolate chip cookies. The milk was in aluminum drinking glasses. Each glass was a different color. The milk was so cold that condensation had already started to form on the sides of the glasses. "Dale and I were down by the creek in the park," said Jonas. "We were playing in the water and walking along the creek bed when I saw something strange. Dale and I looked at it closer, and we could tell it was a wooden box. So we dug it out. That's the box we brought with us." Jonas pointed to the box sitting on the porch. Jonas stopped talking long enough to drink some milk and took a bite of a cookie. Dale saw this as an opportunity to jump in and say something. "We finally got the box open, and inside the box..." "Well, let me show it to you." Dale jumped up and retrieved the box. He pulled and tugged on the lid until it came off. Dale very carefully set the lid down on the porch. He treated the contents of the box gently. He started by taking out the velvet cloth and putting it on his lap. Then he carefully lifted the picture out of the box. Mr. Sifford's eyes were glued to the box and its contents. Dale handed him the picture. "Boys, you have discovered a treasure all right," said Mr. Sifford. He was amazed at what he was looking at, and they were sitting on the edge of their seats waiting for him to say more. "This is a picture of John and Catherine Elizabeth Sifford and some of their children. I'd have to look at them closely to see who the children are. John Sifford was one of my distant cousins who moved into Lincoln County many years ago from Rowan County. What else have you got in that box?" Jonas reached over Dale and pulled out the yellow paper. He unfolded it very carefully and handed it to Mr. Sifford. "This is why we think there might be a buried treasure around here. Can you tell?" Mr. Sifford looked at the paper. He got up, went into the house, and came back with a magnifying glass in his hand. "When you're old like me, these things come in handy," he said as he laughed, sat down, and closely examined the paper. Mr. Sifford looked at the boys and waited a second before he said, "Boys, I believe you have indeed discovered a treasure map." Mr. Sifford walked into the house and invited the boys to join him. He sat at the dining table covered with papers and books. He picked up one stack of papers and thumbed through them until he came to the paper he needed. He began to tell Jonas and Dale a story. John's father, Johann Leonard Sifford, brought a box with him when he immigrated from Germany as a young man about your age. When John became a man, he married Catherine Elizabeth Durr. The box was very special to him, and after he and Elizabeth married, he gave it to her to keep her valuables in. In 1808, John Sifford bought 247 acres on a creek from Mr. Granbury Lowe. It was here that he and Elizabeth raised a large family of 15 children. John was a farmer and a wagon maker in Lincoln County in those days. It was necessary for everyone to raise their own food, Every farm had milk cows, chickens, hogs, and any other animal that could help run the farm, such as horses. The horses were used to pull the plows and wagons and also used to ride to town or school. Mr. Sifford paused for a moment, put the papers back down on the table, and then continued. Now that box you boys found could be the box Johann Leonard Sifford brought with him from Germany. I have no idea how that box got down to the creek, and I'm amazed that it's still in one piece. Jonas and Dale listened carefully to every word Mr. Sifford said. They wanted to remember it all, and they hoped there would be a clue in his information about the piece of paper. Do you have any idea what's written on that piece of paper? Jonas asked. I don't know, said Mr. Sifford. Let me read through some of these papers here on the table about John and his family. I might come across something that would give us a clue. In the meantime, I wonder if you boys would mind if I kept the box. I'd like to clean some more of the dirt off of it and see if perhaps there's something written on it or something marked on it. I'll take good care of it, I promise. Jonas looked over at Dale. What do you think? Dale shrugged his shoulders. I don't think it would hurt anything. I think we could trust him. The boys agreed to leave the box with Mr. Sifford. He walked them to the door, shook their hands, and invited the boys to come back the next day at the same time. Jonas and Dale were confused and relieved at the same time. They were confused about the contents of the box, how it got to the creek, and what the information on the sheet of paper meant. They were relieved that Mr. Sifford was able to give them some answers and willing to help them find more. Come on, Dale, said Jonas. Last one home is a rotten egg. The boys took off running as hard as they could for home. We are going to stop right there. Our next chapter will be A Toast to Success. That is chapter 7. So I hope that you will come back, join us for chapter 7, and perhaps we will get started on looking for that treasure chest. Thank you for coming and listening to the second part of this video, and I hope you'll come back for the next part. Thank you.